Hello. Okay, my first movie at the cinema this year and my first review for the channel, and that's for Night Swim, a supernatural horror written and directed by Bryce McGuire in his directorial debut. It's also produced by Jason Blum and James Wan. The plot follows a suburban family who discover that their backyard swimming pool is haunted. Now, I felt the movie had a solid beginning with a very compelling family dynamic that feels natural. This is aided by the pretty solid performances from all our leads, Wyatt, Russell and Kerry, Condon, and same goes for the rest of our cast. I thought the opening scene in this movie was pretty creepy, it was pretty effective, and for me was quite promising, sort of what to expect with the rest of this experience. And I just loved how they set up the pool in this movie. It becomes a character of its own. It's almost like as if it becomes its own living thing. And I just liked how they used the lights within the pool to sort of alert us that something is coming, and just how they used this little toy boat as this kind of mechanism, as a sort of a temptation for our character to sort of be drawn into the pool. And so the setup was, for me, a very solid setup and a very promising one. And so I was hoping for a very kind of effective and creepy horror movie, because it does start in a way that was very promising for me. And so yeah, the first act within this movie is pretty solid, and it's an act that introduces us to the Waller family, and I'm immediately locked in. It's when the mystery of the pool starts to reveal itself and things start escalating, does the story really start to fall apart for me. It just starts to feel really messy and muddled with how it tells the story, losing focus of the emotional core of the story, which is the family dynamic and what they are experiencing as a family unit. For me, this is completely lost due to this very muddled narrative. And when it comes to the horror and when they attempt to scare us, it just ends up sort of really falling flat. They really sort of fail to scare us, and these moments of horror just end up becoming moments that, you know, we've seen before a million times, and it becomes very generic, which is very frustrating because of that very strong foundation to the movie and the way in which they introduce us to this family. The rest, sort of how this movie sort of evolves, ends up becoming very frustrating. Like the horror, the moments of horror and the scares just end up feeling really forced and generic, and like, oh, you know, I've seen this fucking 1,000 times before, like, and it's really unfortunate. It almost ends up feeling like an experience that, with everything that is set up in the beginning, ends up just amounting to nothing. So as the movie evolves into the second and the third act, everything that I felt like they did a really good job at with introducing us to this family and sort of trying to get us into this story just really ends up amounting to nothing. And that for me is partly down to the narrative really just derailing, and it ends up becoming a very kind of muddled, messy slog to sit through. You know, this is an experience where I was interested. You know, they managed to grab my attention, and I was quite interested in this family's journey and sort of what it was they were experiencing as this family unit. I was locked in, but there's a moment towards the end of the second act going into the third act, and I just completely checked out, because it just ended up, this entire story just ended up becoming very mechanical and paint by the numbers, which really just kind of ended up fueling my frustration, because you could sort of see the potential there within the story. The potential was there, or is there, to sort of really create an effective horror movie. But it just really ends up derailing quite a bit into that second act going into the third. There is this real heartfelt and compelling story involving the character of Wyatt Russell, the dad. And sort of, you know, the fact that he's had to sort of retire from baseball, one of his passions, due to this illness. And I really thought this aspect of the character could have been quite powerful in the way in which it would play into the horror and this sort of, you know, haunted pool. I just could see those pieces of the puzzle and pieces of the story that were like, right, I can see what they're kind of doing here. It's kind of there, but it just really doesn't end up kind of amounting to anything or really kind of working. And I think if handled right, Like, this aspect to the character's journey and the horror even could have been quite powerful, but it just doesn't work for me. And a lot of that is down, I felt, to the awkwardness in the way the story is told. I really dug the score by a Mark Coven. I felt it was quite an effective, solid horror score that ultimately sort of really failed to prop up what is a very messy story. And so it's a shame, because I really liked the score, and there were some moments throughout the movie, more so in the first act, where the score really added a lot to the character moments. But yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't really do anything to really salvage this messy slog of an experience. The film ends with this kind of very retro 80s sort of title card, you know, as well as the credits and with the music. And for me, it didn't quite match the aesthetic of this overall experience, and that ended up really summing up my overall feelings with this movie. Even with the poster, it's kind of got that like 80s retro B-movie horror vibe about it, and it just doesn't quite sort of align with what the overall experience was. And it's sort of like, were they trying to tempt something different maybe? I don't know. But this was a frustrating mess where you could kind of see what it was they were attempting to do with the story. The heart is there, but unfortunately it just doesn't come together. It just massively derails into that second and third act. And it really doesn't manage to achieve what a horror film should do, and that is give you scares. Like, apart from that very first scene in the movie, which I thought was quite creepy, you don't really get that again, and so it's a real shame. You could also see that Stephen King was a big inspiration for the story. Well, that's how it looked to me anyway, personally. Maybe I'm wrong, but it had, this entire experience, or the story anyway, had very Stephen King vibes about it. And there's even a moment in the pool that was very similar to a scene from It. So yeah, unfortunately, this was ended up becoming a bit of a slog. It's quite a bit of a disappointment. It's a horror that doesn't really scare, but has a very promising, solid start, and you can sort of see what the potential was. So they are my thoughts on Night Swim, and I will be giving Night Swim a 4 out of 10. So yeah, they are my thoughts on Night Swim, but what did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you agree or disagree with anything I've said? Then let me know in the comments below, and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to watch future reviews from just some random Welsh geek rambling on, then please hit the subscribe button. It will mean an awful lot to me. Another big thank you to all of my recent subscribers. It means an awful lot. I didn't realise so many of you would want to follow just some random Welsh geek, you know, ramble on, but it does mean an awful lot. So I've sort of set my new goal for the year when it comes to subscribers, and I'm hoping to hit 500 by the end of this year. So yeah, my next review will be for Poor Things. I'm going to catch an advanced screening of that on Wednesday. I'm really looking forward to it because it's already been released in the States, and I'm hearing a lot of positive buzz coming from it. So yeah, enough rambling on from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll be catching you guys soon.